you preparing the country to go back to war?
I'm preparing the country to make sure that we deal with a threat from ISIL. Keep in mind, this is something that we know how to do. I am going to be asking Congress to make sure that they understand and support what our plan is. And it's going to require some resources, I suspect, above what we are currently doing.
Does the President intend to ask Congress for authorization to expand his campaign against ISIL?
Well, I think
just a yes or no.
Unless we're talking about a very specific order from the President, it's hard to talk in very specific terms about what we want Congress to do. But as a general matter, what I can say is that the President is interested in their buy-in.
No definition of buy-in, but this all leading up to a nationwide address on Wednesday and meeting with lawmakers tomorrow. This plan. Now, our friend Ron Fournier at the National Journal wrote this about the statement that it will not involve U.S. troops. At the White House, I found two senior officials who, when promised anonymity, acknowledged that politics plays at least part in the president's no ground troops pledge. It's not a matter of midterm strategy, they insisted, but rather a reflection of the public's aversion to war. Quote, any presidential historian will tell you, one official told me, that you can't get ahead of the public when it comes to war. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Kirsten Powers, USA Today columnist, and syndicate columnist Charles Krauthammer. Steve.
Well, the public is no longer opposed to war in Iraq or in Syria or taking the battle to ISIL, depending on how you define war. There's a CNN poll out today that said 90% of the American public thinks that this presents a serious threat. 67% think the president has no clear plan. 59% think the way that the president is handling it currently, basically by doing nothing, is wrong. So if they're going to use public opinion as a way to get out of doing something, that doesn't work anymore. I think the real question now, there's basically one question. Does the president recognize that this is a significant threat? Has he changed his view on the nature of this threat? Because it's pretty clear all along that he didn't see it as a major threat, didn't see it as a threat to the homeland. You heard that criticism from people who used to serve in his own administration. You heard it from Republicans. You heard it from Democrats. So has the president changed his mind? Does he now see it as a threat? Or is this basically an effort, a public relations effort, to look like he's doing something because there's pressure on him to do something? I think that's the key question.
To that point, Kirsten, here's the president with Chuck Todd being asked about that now infamous comment about JV team.
Long way from when you described them as a JV team.
Well,
was that bad intelligence or your misjudgment?
Keep in mind, I wasn't specifically referring to ISIL. I've said that regionally, there were a whole series of organizations that were focused primarily locally.
There's a lot of back and forth at the White House briefing today about that. PolitiFact said this: President Obama wasn't specifically referring to ISIS with comments about extremists being JV team. Truthometer, false. Washington Post, 4 Pinocchios. The interviewer was certainly asking about ISIS when Obama answered with his JV remarks. This is like a third time at this, Kirsten. Yeah. It's kind of interesting that that's the president's answer.
Well, I think part of the problem is for him to admit that he said that is almost something he can't recover from. I'm not justifying him lying about it, but it is one of those things that, how do you recover from that? How do you recover from saying that? Even though we all know that he said that, you can go back and read it. It's quite clear what he's talking about.
But when that happens, is it like the White House thinks, well, they're just not going to know?
They just think they can keep saying this, and people who are with them are going to believe them, and people who are against them are not going to believe them, versus flat out saying, you're right, I just completely, I said that, I made light of this. And I think it's not just that he made light of ISIS, it's that he also, as we know, the whole Al-Qaeda has been decimated, is on the run. The whole narrative was, we don't need to worry about this anymore. There's nothing out there. It's not no Al-Qaeda, ISIS, nothing. We're safe and we're fine.
Charles, what about this plan? Bring the lawmakers in, give some kind of speech. We don't know whether it's in the afternoon or in prime time yet on Wednesday, but not really it doesn't sound like a plan, let's start this bombing. It sounds like a kind of laying out the blueprint.
I think it'll be more of Obama's rhetoric. He wants to show he has a plan. The other mistake he made was when he said he didn't have a plan. He's now been spending 2 weeks undoing that. You'll know whether he really has a plan if he announces Wednesday night that the line between Syria and Iraq no longer exists in the real world, Therefore, the United States will not make a distinction in going after the people who slit the throats of two Americans, will not make a distinction between one side or another of what is now a fictional international line. So number one, is he prepared to do anything about Syria? The other is, what does this mean he's got a coalition? You know, people ridiculed the George W. coalition in Iraq. It was, in fact, 37 countries with boots on the ground. Is there anybody who's going to be on the ground other than the ones who are already there, the Kurds, the Iraqis, and what's left of the Free Syrian Army? For example, he rounded up 8 NATO allies. Are any of them going to be on the ground? I doubt it. How many will join the air campaign? I assume the British, perhaps Australia. I don't know how many. And he boasts about the Arab League supporting him. Of course, rhetorically, they're going to hold our coats and support us. Are the Saudis or the UAE going to participate in the air campaign? That would be a good thing. Any of them are going to have boots on the ground? I doubt it. But that's what has to be in the speech. Otherwise, it's not a plan. It's a recovery from him saying, I don't have a strategy.
Steve, when asked about this boots on the ground deal, the president said, well, the boots on the ground are going to be Syrian, the Free Syrian Army. Now, this is the same Free Syrian Army that he talked about weeks before as kind of not up to the task.
A fantasy. A fantasy.
Pharmacists, remember?
Pharmacists and doctors. Yeah. He said it was a fantasy to think that it would have made any difference had the United States supplied them with arms and funding. Look, I think this just reflects the president's muddled thinking on this. I mean, he hasn't had a strategy. He's trying to decide whether he was completely wrong to have underestimated them, or at least he's sort of coming to grips with the fact that he may have been completely wrong to underestimate them in the manner that he did. But there's still some tension here. I mean, what will be most telling in his speech on Wednesday is whether the president talks about specific action and talks more about what the United States is going to do to eliminate this very serious threat, or if he talks more about what we're not going to do to limit ourselves. I mean, not putting troops on the ground as you turn to allies and ask them for your help, and as you try to convince the country that this is a serious threat that we need to be going to war for. There's some tension there. It just doesn't seem to fit.
I think if you listen to Josh Earnest today, you did get a little bit of clue. At least the president doesn't seem to have moved that much since the last time he spoke, meaning that they see this as a regional threat. And that when asked about the Free Syrian Army, well, why now? Why the Free Syrian Army? The response was, well, because basically it's their problem. You know, it's the Iraqis' problem in Iraq. It's the Syrians' problems in Syria.
Until they behead another American journalist.
And with no real indication that it was our problem. And even went back to the original talking points of the reason that we even got involved in Iraq in the first place dealing with ISIS was because humanitarian issues and because we had staff on the ground, essentially. So it'll be interesting to see if the president's still in that place or if he's going to come out and expand this and to say, this isn't just their problem, this is our problem too.
Look, we had, if I can just quickly, if you go back and look at the testimony in the worldwide threats hearing from the senior leaders of the intelligence community, February 4th of this year, you had people like James Clapper saying, this is an immediate threat to Europe, it's going to be a threat to the U.S. homeland. So if the president today is pretending that this isn't a threat to the United States here, he's not listening to what he's hearing, by and large, from his top intelligence officials.